The observation deck of the Galactic Council headquarters floated in the void between stars, a massive structure built by 63 different species over the course of 2,000 years. Inside the main chamber, holographic displays showed a blue and green planet rotating slowly in the darkness of space. Ambassador Toril adjusted his viewing screen and felt a familiar sense of detachment wash over him. He had witnessed this scene 47 times before during his 3 centuries of service. A fleet of warships approached the planet from the outer rim of its solar system. The vessels belonged to the Krellian Dominion, and their arrival meant only one thing: another conquest was about to begin. Lyra entered the observation chamber carrying data tablets, her young features still unmarred by the weight of too many years watching worlds fall. She was a Meridian, a species known for their compassion and their inability to look away from suffering. Toril sometimes wondered why her people chose careers in observation when it clearly pained them so deeply. "The Krellians have sent their standard ultimatum," Lyra said, placing a tablet in front of Toril. "Submit within 12 of the planet's rotational periods or face eradication." Toril scanned the document without much interest. The words were always the same, translated into whatever primitive language the target species used. This planet's inhabitants called themselves humans, and they called their world Earth. They had not yet achieved faster-than-light travel, which meant the Council's prime directive applied. No interference, no contact, no aid. "Have the humans responded?" Toril asked. "Yes," Lyra replied, her voice tight. "They intercepted the transmission 4 hours ago. Their global communication networks are showing widespread panic, but their governments are coordinating." "Coordinating what? Surrender terms?" "No, Ambassador. They appear to be mobilizing for war." Toril laughed, the sound bitter and tired. "War against the Krellians, with their chemical rockets and primitive nuclear weapons." He shook his head. "How long do you estimate they will last?" Lyra consulted her tablet. Based on Krellian conquest patterns and human military capabilities, complete planetary subjugation should occur within 72 hours of initial ground deployment. 3 days, Toril muttered. "Mark it in the records, another species that chose pride over survival." Around them, other council observers settled into their stations. Some brought refreshments from their home worlds. Others placed wagers on various aspects of the coming conflict. It was always the same. The Krellians would land, the defenders would resist briefly, then reality would set in and surrender would follow. The Council would watch, document, and file away another tragic example of a species that discovered they were not alone in the universe too late to matter. On the main display, the Krellian fleet entered Earth's orbital space. General Havros commanded the invasion force from his flagship, a massive dreadnought that had broken the spirits of dozens of worlds. His message to the Council was perfunctory, a legal formality required by ancient treaties. The Krellians were informing the Council of their intent to claim Earth and its surrounding space as Dominion territory. "Begin recording," Toril ordered. "Standard observation protocols, full spectrum analysis, mark timeline at invasion commencement." The first orbital bombardment began 30 minutes later. Kinetic impactors struck military installations across the planet's surface. Lyra's fingers trembled as she recorded the destruction. Toril noted her distress but said nothing. She would learn, as he had learned, that sympathy changed nothing. The humans responded faster than expected. Within 2 hours, they had launched countermeasures. Primitive missiles rose from the planet's surface, targeting the Krellian ships with surprising accuracy. Most were destroyed before reaching orbit, but 3 managed to detonate close enough to damage shield systems on 2 frigates. "Interesting," muttered Draxus, a senior observer from a species that had served the Council since its founding. "They are more resourceful than anticipated." "It changes nothing," Toril replied. "Resourcefulness without technology is merely prolonged suffering." The Krellian ground forces deployed next. Drop pods fell like rain across Earth's continents, releasing thousands of armored soldiers equipped with energy weapons and powered combat suits. Toril expected the usual pattern: shock, retreat, desperate final stands, then collapse. Instead, the humans dug in. Reports began flooding in from Krellian field commanders, and the tone shifted from confident to confused. Human military forces were not retreating to defensive positions around population centers. They were engaging Krellian troops directly, using terrain and unconventional tactics. In one city, humans collapsed buildings onto advancing Krellian formations. In another, they flooded tunnel systems, drowning soldiers in powered armor. "They are adapting," Lyra said, her voice carrying a note of hope that made Toril uncomfortable. "Look at this engagement. They identified the Krellian communication frequency and are broadcasting jamming signals." "Lucky guesses," Toril said. "It will not save them." But as the first day of invasion turned into the second, Toril found himself paying closer attention to the displays. The humans were not simply fighting. They were learning. Captured Krellian weapons appeared in human hands within hours. Damaged drop pods were being studied, their technology reverse-engineered at impossible speeds. General Havros sent his first request for reinforcements, claiming unexpected resistance. Toril noted the word choice: not fierce resistance or determined resistance, but unexpected. The Krellian commander had not anticipated this level of coordination from a pre-FTL species. By the third day, human forces had established defensive perimeters around major population centers. They had learned to target Krellian supply lines rather than engaging in direct combat. More disturbingly, they had begun using psychological warfare, broadcasting messages to Krellian troops in their own language, messages that somehow knew details about Krellian culture and military doctrine. "How are they learning so fast?" Lyra asked, reviewing combat footage. Toril had no answer. In his centuries of observation, he had never seen a species adapt this quickly to alien technology and tactics. The humans were supposed to be primitives, barely beyond their own planet. Yet they fought with the cunning of a species that had survived countless wars. And they had. Toril pulled up Earth's historical database, information gathered by Council survey drones over the past century. What he saw made his blood run cold. This species had fought wars for thousands of years. They had survived ice ages, mass extinctions, plagues that killed substantial portions of their population. They had split the atom and pointed the resulting weapons at themselves, living under threat of self-annihilation for generations. They were not primitives, they were survivors, and the Krellians had just given them a reason to survive one more impossible challenge. "Ambassador," Lyra said quietly, "what if they win?" Toril did not answer. He could not answer, because for the first time in 47 observed invasions, he was beginning to wonder the same thing. The Krellian command ship hung in high orbit, its hull scarred by impacts that should never have occurred. General Havros stared at tactical displays that made no sense according to every invasion manual ever written. 6 days had passed since deployment, and his forces still had not secured a single major city. Down on Earth's surface, the humans were doing something the Krellians had never encountered before. They were winning. Not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Every Krellian position faced constant harassment. Human fighters appeared from nowhere, struck hard, then vanished into terrain their enemies could not navigate. The primitives were using their own planet as a weapon. In the Council observation chamber, more representatives had gathered to watch. Word had spread through galactic networks that something unusual was happening on Earth. Species from across the galaxy sent observers to witness the impossible, a pre-FTL civilization holding its own against the Krellian dominion. Lyra barely slept anymore. She monitored feeds from across the planet, watching humans organize resistance with stunning efficiency. They shared information instantly across their global communication networks. Scientists from different nations collaborated on analyzing Krellian technology. Military forces coordinated attacks across multiple continents simultaneously. They are treating this as a species-wide emergency, she told Toral during a brief rest period. Every resource, every mind, every person is focused on survival. Toral reviewed casualty reports with growing unease. Human losses were catastrophic by any reasonable measure. Entire cities had been damaged. Millions had died. Yet the survivors did not break. Instead, they seemed to fight harder with each loss, as if every death fueled their determination rather than crushing their spirit. It is irrational, Draxus observed from his station. Any logical species would have calculated the odds and surrendered by now. The Krellians still maintain overwhelming force superiority. Humans do not appear to make decisions based solely on logic, Lyra replied. She displayed psychological profiles compiled by council researchers. They possess something their language calls hope, the belief that victory is possible even when probability suggests otherwise. Hope is not a military strategy, Toral said. No, Lyra agreed, but it seems to be a survival trait. On Earth, the humans were proving her point in ways that defied military doctrine. In the Asian continent, soldiers had lured a Krellian battalion into a mountain pass, then triggered massive avalanches. In the Americas, resistance fighters used ancient tunnel systems to move beneath Krellian-controlled territory, appearing behind enemy lines to capture supplies. In Africa, warriors who had never seen advanced technology before were teaching Krellian soldiers why humans had spent millennia perfecting the art of ambush. General Havros received his second wave of reinforcements and immediately deployed them to break the stalemate. Krellian doctrine dictated overwhelming force at key points. He concentrated his armies on 3 major cities, intending to crush resistance and force surrender through demonstration of superior might. The humans responded by abandoning those cities entirely. Krellian forces marched into empty streets, finding nothing but traps and automated defenses. The human populations had evacuated in organized retreats, taking their resources and knowledge with them. Havros had captured territory but gained nothing useful. Worse, he had concentrated his forces exactly where the humans wanted them. Human forces struck the dispersed Krellian supply depots simultaneously, destroying fuel reserves and ammunition stockpiles. They hit communications relays, forcing Krellian units to operate independently without central coordination. They targeted medical facilities, knowing the Krellians had not anticipated extended combat and lacked adequate supplies for a prolonged campaign. They are fighting asymmetrically, a council military analyst explained to the assembled observers. The humans recognize they cannot win direct engagements, so they are not fighting direct engagements. They strike where the enemy is weak and avoid where the enemy is strong. It is primitive strategy, but executed with remarkable sophistication. What troubled the analyst more was how quickly humans were learning from captured Krellian technology. Within a week, human engineers had figured out how to power Krellian energy weapons using their own electrical systems. They had adapted Krellian armor plating to reinforce defensive positions. Most impressively, they had hacked into Krellian communication networks and were feeding false information to confuse enemy commanders. Toral watched a video feed from a battlefield in Europe. Human soldiers fought alongside civilians who had taken up arms. Medical personnel treated wounded fighters in underground hospitals, using stolen Krellian medical technology they had learned to operate through trial and error. Scientists worked in hidden laboratories, taking apart captured equipment to understand its principles. The entire species had become an army, not just their military forces, but their farmers producing food, their doctors saving lives, their teachers explaining alien technology to children who might need to understand it tomorrow. Every human contributed to survival in whatever way they could. "This is what desperation looks like," Draxus said. "They know they will be enslaved or exterminated if they lose. It has concentrated their entire civilization on a single goal." "Other species have faced the same desperation," Toril countered. "It did not save them." "Other species did not have Earth's history," Lyra said quietly. She displayed geological and historical data on the main screen. "This planet has experienced 5 mass extinction events. The current human population descended from perhaps 10,000 individuals who survived an ice age that should have killed them all. They spent 200,000 years clawing their way up from near annihilation. Survival is not something they hope for, Ambassador. It is what they do." On the display, a human pilot flew a captured Krellian fighter craft into an enemy cruiser, sacrificing himself to destroy a ship that had been bombarding a civilian shelter. The council chamber fell silent as they watched the explosion. "Effective," Draxus noted, "but wasteful of resources." "They do not see it that way," Lyra said, her voice thick with emotion. "They see one life traded for thousands saved. They calculate worth differently than we do." General Havros sent a priority message to Krellian High Command, requesting authorization for orbital weapons platforms. He wanted to begin large-scale bombardment that would break human resistance through sheer destruction. The response came back within hours. Denied. The Krellians wanted Earth's resources intact. Bombing the planet into submission would defeat the purpose of conquest. The humans somehow intercepted that communication. Within a day, they had broadcasted across their global networks along with a simple message: "The invaders want our world intact. That means we can make this too costly for them to continue." Toril realized the humans had just figured out the Krellian strategic weakness. This was not about honor or glory for the Krellians. It was about profit and expansion, and the humans were rapidly making the cost exceed the potential gain. "They are going to win," Lyra whispered. "By every logical measure they should have lost days ago, but they are going to win." Toril said nothing. He simply watched the displays and wondered what kind of species could turn certain defeat into possible victory through nothing but refusal to surrender. 2 weeks into what should have been a 3-day conquest, the Krellian Dominion faced a reality they had never encountered in 3 centuries of expansion. Their invasion of Earth was failing. General Havros stood in his command center, reviewing reports that defied every tactical projection. Krellian casualties had reached 15,000 soldiers. Equipment losses exceeded 30%. Morale among his troops was deteriorating as they faced an enemy who refused to follow predictable patterns. The humans had stopped defending positions and started hunting. Small groups of human fighters moved through territories the Krellians thought they controlled, ambushing patrols and vanishing before reinforcements arrived. They used knowledge of their own planet's geography that no orbital scan could provide. Hidden caves became armories. Abandoned subway tunnels became highways for moving troops unseen. Forests that looked empty on Krellian sensors were actually full of waiting fighters. In the council chamber, the mood had shifted from detached observation to intense fascination. Representatives from 63 species watched feeds from Earth with a mixture of awe and growing concern. Lyra had stopped trying to hide her emotional investment in the outcome. Even Toril found himself hoping the humans would succeed, though he would never admit it aloud. "The Krellians are requesting additional support from their home fleet," Draxus announced, reading an intercepted communication. "They are asking for 40,000 more troops and triple their current naval assets." "Will High Command approve?" someone asked. "They already have," Draxus replied. "The reinforcements will arrive in 6 days." A human-intercepted message appeared on monitors across the observation chamber moments later. Someone on Earth had broken Krellian encryption again. The humans now knew exactly when reinforcements would arrive and in what numbers. More importantly, they knew the Krellians were struggling badly enough to need help. The message spread across Earth's networks within minutes, along with a statement from the Unified Human Military Command. 6 days. We have 6 days to make them regret ever coming here. What followed was the most coordinated military offensive the Council observers had ever witnessed from a pre-FTL species. Human forces struck every Krellian position simultaneously across the entire planet. They did not try to hold territory. They simply wanted to destroy as much Krellian equipment and kill as many soldiers as possible before reinforcements arrived. The assault was brutal and efficient. Humans had learned exactly where to hit Krellian armor to penetrate it. They knew which Krellian weapon systems could be overloaded and made to explode. They had identified command officers and targeted them specifically, causing chaos in enemy ranks. Most disturbing to the observers, humans had begun using psychological tactics that suggested they understood Krellian culture better than species who had dealt with the Dominion for centuries. Lyra watched a video feed from a battle in South America. A group of human soldiers had surrounded a Krellian position and were broadcasting a message in perfect Krellian language. They were offering surrender terms, not asking to surrender, but offering the Krellians a chance to give up. The Krellian squad refused and prepared to fight to the death, as their honor code demanded. The humans responded by destroying their communication equipment, cutting off their ability to call for extraction, then simply left them there. Trapped, isolated, and facing the choice between slow starvation or surrendering to primitives who should have been slaves by now. They are learning psychological warfare, Toril observed with a mixture of respect and fear. Not just killing enemies but breaking their will to fight. It is effective, Draxus admitted. Krellian soldiers are trained to face death with honor. They are not trained to face humiliation and abandonment. On Earth, human scientists had achieved something remarkable. They had successfully reverse-engineered Krellian shield technology and were beginning to deploy it on defensive installations. The shields were crude compared to the originals, but they worked well enough to protect critical infrastructure from orbital bombardment. More impressively, a team of human engineers had managed to repair and fly a captured Krellian transport ship. The vessel was small and damaged, but it was functional, and it was in orbit, piloted by humans who had never left their planet before but were now engaging Krellian fighters in space combat. General Havros watched in disbelief as his pilots reported engaging enemy craft using stolen Krellian technology. The human pilots flew recklessly, taking risks no trained fighter would consider. Several died as their inexperience proved fatal, but the ones who survived learned from those mistakes and adapted their tactics. They are evolving their combat doctrine in real time, Havros reported to his superiors. Every engagement teaches them something new, and they implement those lessons immediately. We are not fighting primitives anymore. We are fighting a species that learns faster than we can adapt. The council chamber listened to this report in stunned silence. A Krellian general admitting his enemy was outthinking him was unprecedented. The Dominion's military pride was built on technological superiority and tactical excellence. Yet here was their finest commander acknowledging that humans, with inferior weapons and no space combat experience, were becoming dangerous opponents. Toril reviewed the data with growing unease. Earth's population was over 7 billion individuals. The Krellians had killed millions, yet the survivors had not broken. Instead, those losses had been replaced by new fighters, new scientists, new strategists who stepped forward to continue the war. The humans had depth of resources the Krellians had not anticipated. What is Earth's industrial capacity? Toril asked Lyra. She pulled up economic data. Substantial. They manufacture goods on a massive scale, though their technology is primitive by our standards. However, they are converting civilian manufacturing to military production at an extraordinary rate. Factories that made vehicles are now making weapons. Chemical plants that produced fertilizer are now producing explosives. Their entire economy has shifted to war production. How long can they sustain this? Unknown, Lyra admitted, but their history suggests they can maintain total war for years if necessary. One of their global conflicts lasted 6 years and involved most of their civilization. Draxus made a sound of disbelief. 6 years of total war, the casualties alone should have collapsed their species. They lost over 60 million people in that conflict, Lyra said quietly, and they rebuilt. They always rebuild. On the main display, human forces launched their most daring operation yet. 3 captured Krellian vessels, retrofitted with human weapons and crewed by pilots with barely 2 weeks of space flight experience, approached the Krellian fleet in orbit. They broadcast a message on all frequencies, ensuring the Council observers could hear. The message was simple and direct: leave now or we will make you leave. General Havros ordered his fleet to destroy the approaching vessels. It should have been simple: 3 small ships against a fleet of 40 warships. But the human pilots did not engage in traditional combat. They flew straight at the Krellian flagship, ignoring defensive fire, accepting damage that would make most species retreat. 2 ships were destroyed before reaching their target. The third slammed into the flagship's shield generators at maximum velocity, a suicide run that no military doctrine anticipated, because no one expected rational beings to willingly die in such a futile gesture. Except it was not futile. The collision destroyed the shield generators, and waiting in Earth's orbital space were dozens of primitive nuclear missiles, launched the moment the shields went down. They struck the flagship in a coordinated barrage, causing catastrophic damage and forcing the vessel to retreat. The council chamber erupted in chaos as observers shouted questions and theories. Toril sat silently, watching the wounded Krellian flagship limp away from Earth. A pre-FTL species had just damaged the most powerful warship in one of the galaxy's most feared military forces. And they had done it by sacrificing 3 volunteers who flew to certain death to create an opening for their comrades. That kind of tactical thinking required more than desperation. It required a fundamental willingness to trade individual survival for collective victory. These humans, Draxus said slowly, are the most dangerous species I have ever observed, not because of their technology or their numbers, but because they simply will not stop. The Krellian reinforcements arrived to find their invasion force in disarray. 40,000 fresh troops and triple the naval assets should have turned the tide decisively. Instead, they found themselves entering a conflict that had evolved beyond anything their training had prepared them for. The humans were no longer defending, they were attacking. In the 3 weeks since invasion began, Earth's military forces had transformed from a collection of national armies into a unified fighting force that shared technology, tactics, and intelligence across the entire planet. They had established a command structure that coordinated operations on 6 continents simultaneously. Most importantly, they had learned to use captured Krellian technology not just as weapons, but as tools for innovation. General Havros briefed the newly arrived commanders with a frank assessment that shocked them. The humans had achieved orbital capability using stolen ships. They had developed functional energy shields for ground installations. They had cracked Krellian encryption and were monitoring military communications. They had even begun manufacturing crude copies of Krellian weapons using their own industrial base. "How is this possible?" demanded Commander Vril, who led the reinforcement fleet. "They are primitives. They should not even understand the basic principles of our technology." "They are not primitives," Havros replied bitterly. "They are survivors, and every day they survive, they learn something new." The Council Observation Chamber had become a gathering point for representatives from across the galaxy. Species who had remained neutral for centuries were now watching Earth with intense interest. The implications were staggering. If humans could resist the Krellians successfully, it meant the Dominion was not invincible. It meant other conquered worlds might consider resistance. Toril reviewed intelligence reports that painted a disturbing picture of human capability. In 3 weeks, they had reverse-engineered technology that should have taken years to understand. They had developed counter-tactics to weapons they had never seen before. They had organized a planetary defense, using communication systems the Krellians had tried repeatedly to destroy, but which humans kept rebuilding faster than they could be damaged. They have something we did not account for, Lyra said, displaying data on human social structures. They call it redundancy. Every critical system has backups. Every command structure has replacements ready. Every piece of knowledge is shared across multiple locations. You cannot break their society by destroying key points because there are no single points of failure. Draxus studied the information with a tactician's eye. It is inefficient. The duplication of effort wastes resources. It also means they cannot be defeated through decapitation strikes, Lyra countered. The Krellians have tried targeting human leadership 17 times. New leaders simply step forward to replace those killed. The resistance continues uninterrupted. Commander Vril launched a massive offensive intended to crush human resistance through overwhelming force. He committed 30,000 troops to a coordinated assault on human strongholds across 3 continents. The attack was supported by orbital bombardment and air superiority that should have been decisive. The humans had prepared for exactly this strategy. They had evacuated the targeted strongholds days earlier, leaving behind automated defenses and traps. When Krellian forces occupied the positions, they found themselves spread thin across territory that offered no strategic value. Human forces then struck at the gaps in Krellian lines, isolating units and destroying supply convoys. Within 72 hours, Vril's offensive had stalled. Worse, he had lost more troops to human counterattacks than he had killed in the initial assault. The primitives were fighting with a level of strategic sophistication that suggested they had studied Krellian military doctrine and developed specific counters for it. They had. A team of human military historians had analyzed every recorded Krellian conquest, identifying patterns and tendencies. They predicted Krellian responses to specific situations with unsettling accuracy. The invaders were following their own playbook, and the humans had read ahead. In orbit, the expanded Krellian fleet faced a new problem. Human engineers had weaponized their space infrastructure. Satellites that once provided communications now carried explosives. Space stations that once conducted research now housed missile batteries. The debris field from destroyed human spacecraft had been deliberately positioned to create hazards for Krellian vessels. 3 Krellian cruisers suffered hull breaches from high-velocity impacts with what appeared to be random debris. Investigation revealed the debris was not random. Humans had calculated trajectories that would intersect with Krellian patrol routes, turning their own destroyed equipment into passive weapons. They are learning orbital mechanics and using them against us, a Krellian navigator reported. They know where our ships will be and are placing hazards in our path. The Council observers watched this development with a mixture of fascination and horror. A species that had never left its own planet was now conducting sophisticated orbital warfare. They were learning not just to fight in space, but to use space itself as a weapon. Toril accessed historical databases, searching for any comparable situation. In 5,000 years of recorded galactic history, no species had ever transitioned from pre-FTL to combat-effective space operations in less than 3 weeks. The humans were not just surviving. They were evolving at a rate that defied natural development. There is something unique about their neural architecture, Lyra said, reading xenobiology reports. Human brains form new connections rapidly in response to new information. They call it neuroplasticity. It allows them to learn and adapt faster than species with more rigid neural structures. It is an evolutionary adaptation, Draxus observed. Their planet subjected them to constant environmental changes. Those who could not adapt quickly died. The survivors passed on genes for rapid learning. Which means we are fighting the end product of billions of years of evolution, specifically selecting for adaptability, Toril said quietly. We are fighting a species designed by nature to survive the unsurvivable. General Havros's flagship was struck by a human missile that penetrated shields using a frequency modulation the Krellians had thought impossible to achieve. The weapon was crude, clearly jury-rigged from captured components and human explosives, but it worked. Havros survived because he was not on the bridge when the missile hit, but his command ship was crippled. He evacuated to a secondary vessel and authorized a desperate measure. Krellian High Command had given him access to bioweapons designed to incapacitate human populations without destroying infrastructure. It was a war crime by Council standards, but the Dominion had never cared about Council opinions before. The humans intercepted the authorization code before Havros could implement it. They broadcast the information across all frequencies, ensuring every species in the galaxy knew the Krellians were preparing to use biological warfare against a pre-FTL civilization. The Council was forced to issue an official condemnation, though they still refused to intervene directly. More importantly, the humans responded with a message directed at Krellian soldiers, not commanders. They broadcast information about the bioweapons in Krellian language, explaining that High Command was willing to kill them along with the humans rather than admit defeat. They offered medical treatment and asylum to any Krellian who wanted to leave the battle. The first defections occurred within hours. Small groups of Krellian soldiers, disgusted by their leadership's willingness to use such weapons, surrendered to human forces. The humans kept their word, providing medical care and treating prisoners according to conventions they had established centuries ago for their own wars. News of this spread through Krellian ranks. More soldiers began questioning orders. Some refused to advance. A few actively sabotaged weapons systems rather than continue fighting. The Krellian Dominion was experiencing something it had never faced before, its own troops losing faith in their cause. The humans had not just resisted physically. They had attacked the ideological foundation that held the Dominion together. Commander Vril sent a secret message to High Command, one he did not know the humans would intercept and the Council would hear. The message was brief and devastating. We cannot win this war. Request immediate withdrawal before losses become catastrophic. The Krellian High Command rejected the request. They could not afford to show weakness. If word spread that a pre-FTL species had defeated them, every conquered world would rise in rebellion. They ordered Vril to continue the invasion regardless of cost. Toril watched this exchange with deep sadness. The Krellians were trapped by their own pride, unable to retreat even as victory slipped beyond reach. The humans had created a situation where the invaders faced two choices: admit defeat or fight until complete destruction. And the humans were prepared to help them destroy themselves, if that was what it took to win. 4 weeks after the invasion began, the Krellian Dominion faced a truth they had spent centuries avoiding. They were losing. General Havros sat in a medical bay, recovering from injuries sustained when human forces destroyed his third command ship. He had begun the invasion commanding 40,000 soldiers. Now barely 20,000 remained combat effective. Equipment losses exceeded 60%. Morale had collapsed, and High Command was still ordering him to continue. The breaking point came on a battlefield in Central Asia. A Krellian battalion surrounded a small group of human defenders who had taken position in a ruined city. The humans had no chance of escape. Standard procedure called for orbital bombardment followed by ground force cleanup. Instead, the Krellian battalion commander did something unprecedented. He walked into the human position under a white flag and offered to let them leave. Not surrender, just leave. The humans asked why. The Krellian commander's response was recorded and broadcast across every network on Earth. Because we are tired of dying for a cause that is already lost. Go home to your families. We just want to go home to ours. The humans accepted the truce. Both sides withdrew from the position. Within hours, 3 more Krellian units had negotiated local ceasefires with human forces they were fighting. The Dominion's military discipline was crumbling, replaced by soldiers who wanted to survive more than they wanted to conquer. In the Council Observation Chamber, representatives from 63 species watched history unfold. The Krellian Dominion, which had conquered 47 worlds over 3 centuries, was being defeated not by superior technology but by superior determination. Lyra compiled reports that told the story of human resistance in stark numbers. 700 million casualties, both civilian and military. 15% of their global infrastructure destroyed. Economic damage that would take decades to repair. By any measure, the invasion had been devastating. Yet the humans had not broken. They had adapted, learned, and fought until their enemy lost the will to continue. They had turned a technological disadvantage into irrelevance through innovation and sacrifice. They had proven that survival was not about having the best weapons, but about refusing to give up. This changes everything, Draxus said quietly. If a pre-FTL species can defeat the Krellians, then the entire galactic power structure is built on a false assumption. The Dominion was feared because we believed them invincible. Now every conquered species will know the truth. Toril understood the implications. The Council had maintained peace through a delicate balance of power among major civilizations. The Krellian Dominion was a key part of that balance. If they were weakened significantly, other powers might move to fill the vacuum. The galaxy could face widespread conflict. Or something else might happen, something the Council had never seriously considered. Species might start believing they could resist conquest. Civilizations might stop accepting subjugation as inevitable. The entire concept of powerful empires dominating weaker species might come into question. And it would all be because humans refused to accept their assigned role as victims. Commander Vril sent his final report to High Command, no longer caring if humans intercepted it. The invasion had cost the Dominion over 40,000 soldiers, 200 spacecraft, and immeasurable damage to their reputation. He recommended immediate withdrawal and opening negotiations with Earth for a formal peace treaty. High Command's response arrived 12 hours later. Vril was relieved of command and ordered to return home to face court-martial for failure. The invasion would continue under new leadership. The Dominion could not afford to show weakness. The humans intercepted this communication as well. They responded by broadcasting a message that reached every corner of Krellian-controlled space. The message explained what had happened on Earth, how a primitive species had fought the Dominion to a standstill, how Krellian soldiers were defecting rather than continue dying for a pointless war, how High Command was sacrificing troops to protect pride. Rebellions began on 3 conquered worlds within a week. Species that had submitted to Krellian rule for decades suddenly believed resistance was possible. They had seen humans succeed where logic said success was impossible. If primitives with chemical rockets could win, what could civilizations with actual technology accomplish? The Krellian Dominion faced a choice. Continue the war on Earth and risk uprising across their entire empire, or withdraw and accept the humiliation. For the first time in their history, they chose survival over pride. The withdrawal order reached what remained of the invasion force on Earth 36 days after the first ships had arrived. Krellian commanders negotiated with human forces for safe passage off the planet. The humans could have slaughtered them during retreat. Instead, they allowed the invaders to leave, but demanded all military equipment be left behind as reparations. The Krellians agreed. They abandoned weapons, vehicles, ships, everything they could not carry personally. Human forces moved in immediately to secure the equipment, adding to the massive technological windfall the war had provided. The Council watched the final Krellian ship leave Earth's orbit in silence. 63 species had witnessed something that would reshape galactic civilization. A pre-FTL species had not just survived invasion by a major power, they had won. Toril initiated communication with Earth, knowing the Prime Directive no longer applied. The humans had demonstrated they were ready for contact, whether the Council approved or not. First contact protocols would have to be modified to account for a species that had fought their way into galactic awareness rather than being discovered peacefully. The communication request was answered immediately. A human appeared on the display, dressed in military uniform bearing marks of recent combat. She looked exhausted, bearing scars both visible and invisible, but her eyes held no fear, only determination and hard-won confidence. "This is the Galactic Council," Toril began formally. "We wish to open diplomatic relations with Earth and discuss your integration into the galactic community." The human was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady but carried an edge that made Toril uncomfortable. "You watched us die for 5 weeks. You sat in your observation chamber and recorded our suffering like it was entertainment. Now that we have survived without your help, you want to talk." Toril had no good answer. The human was correct. The Council had watched Earth face extinction and done nothing. Their laws had demanded non-interference, but those laws suddenly seemed inadequate when confronted with the reality of what they had permitted. "Our protocols require non-interference with pre-FTL civilizations," Toril explained, knowing how hollow it sounded. "Your protocols condemned us to fight alone," the human replied. "We will remember that. Every human who survived will remember that when the galaxy came to destroy us, you watched, and when we needed help, you offered laws and excuses." She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. Then her expression shifted slightly, showing not anger but resolve. "But we are not interested in revenge. We are interested in making sure what happened to us never happens to anyone else. The Council needs to understand something. We did not fight just to survive. We fought to prove that species do not have to accept being conquered. If you want to talk to us, that is the conversation we will have. How do we change a galaxy that allows invasion to happen in the first place?" The question hung in the air between Earth and the Council headquarters. Toril realized this was not going to be a standard first contact situation, where a grateful primitive civilization joined the galactic community and learned their place in the existing order. The humans were demanding the order itself change, and after watching them defeat the Krellians, the Council had to consider the possibility that they might succeed. The debate in the Council chambers had lasted for 3 days without resolution. 63 species argued about what to do with Earth, what to do with the Krellian Dominion, and most importantly, what to do about the precedent the entire situation had created. Toril stood before the assembly, presenting humanity's demands. They were not requests. The humans had made that very clear. After surviving an extinction-level invasion without Council help, they were not asking permission to change galactic policy. They were informing the Council that change would happen, with or without official approval. "Earth demands the Council revise the Prime Directive," Toril explained. "They want active intervention to prevent invasions of pre-FTL worlds. They want the Krellian Dominion dismantled and occupied territories freed. They want reparations paid to every species the Krellians have conquered, and they want a seat on this Council to ensure these changes are implemented." The chamber erupted in protest. Species that had been Council members for millennia objected to a newcomer making demands. Others feared the political upheaval such changes would cause. The most conservative members argued that giving in to human demands would undermine the entire structure of galactic governance. Draxus called for order, his ancient voice cutting through the chaos. The question before us is not whether we like humanity's demands. The question is whether we can refuse them, and I suggest we cannot. He displayed tactical analyses of Earth's new capabilities. In 5 weeks, humans had acquired and adapted enough Krellian technology to become a spacefaring civilization. They had studied captured ships and were already building their own vessels using hybrid human-Krellian designs. Conservative estimates suggested Earth would have a functioning space fleet within 6 months. More concerning was their willingness to use that fleet. Intercepted human communications showed they were preparing to contact Krellian-occupied worlds directly, offering technology and support for resistance movements. Earth was not going to wait for Council approval to reshape galactic politics. If we refuse their demands, they will act independently, Draxus continued. They will arm resistance movements across Krellian space. They will destabilize an empire that, despite its flaws, has been part of galactic balance for centuries. The resulting chaos could trigger conflicts we cannot control. Lyra spoke next, her voice carrying emotion she no longer tried to hide. Or we could admit that our system is flawed. We watched Earth face annihilation because our laws said we could not interfere. Those laws are wrong. The humans are right to demand we change them. The debate continued for hours, but the outcome was inevitable. The Council could not stop Earth from acting, and the precedent of the invasion could not be ignored. Too many species had watched humans survive the impossible. Too many conquered worlds had learned that resistance could succeed. The vote came on the 4th day. The Prime Directive was amended to allow intervention in cases of invasion or genocide against pre-FTL civilizations. The Krellian Dominion would be placed under Council oversight and forced to grant independence to occupied territories. Earth would receive full Council membership despite lacking FTL capability. Toril delivered the decision personally, traveling to Earth aboard a Council diplomatic vessel. It was his first time actually visiting the planet he had observed for so long. The damage was still visible from orbit. Entire cities showed scars from bombardment, but reconstruction was already underway, and humans were rebuilding with the same determination they had shown in war. The meeting took place in a hastily constructed diplomatic facility on the surface. Human representatives from dozens of nations attended, a reminder that Earth was still not a unified government despite their coordinated defense. They listened to Toril's announcement in silence. When he finished, a human delegate stood to respond. His name was David, a former soldier who now represented his nation in diplomatic matters. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had survived horrors and emerged stronger. "The Council's decision is a start," David said, "but we need to be clear about what this means. Earth is not joining the galactic community as a junior partner. We are joining as equals who have proven our worth in blood. We expect to be treated accordingly." He gestured to a display showing images from the war, destroyed cities, mass graves, memorials for the 700 million who had died. These losses cannot be undone, but they can be honored by ensuring no other species faces the same fate. Earth will hold the Council accountable to its new protocols. Toril nodded slowly. He understood the implicit threat. Earth was not going to trust the Council to enforce its own rules. They would be watching, ready to act if the Council failed to protect other vulnerable worlds. "There is one more matter," David continued. "The Krellians who defected during the invasion and helped us. The soldiers who refused to use bioweapons and chose to surrender rather than continue fighting. Earth requests they be pardoned and allowed to remain here if they wish. They showed honor when their leaders did not. We will not punish them for doing what was right." The request surprised Toril. These were enemy soldiers who had participated in killing millions of humans, yet Earth was willing to offer them sanctuary. It was a demonstration of the same complexity that had made humans such formidable opponents. They could be ruthless in war yet merciful in victory. "The Council will consider your request," Toril said formally. "The Council will approve it," David replied, not a threat but a statement of fact. "Because if you do not, Earth will grant them asylum anyway. We keep our promises, Ambassador, even to former enemies who earned our respect." The diplomatic session concluded with formal agreements signed and new protocols established. Earth officially joined the Galactic Council, the first pre-FTL species ever granted membership. The event was broadcast across the galaxy, carrying a message that resonated through countless civilizations. On worlds conquered by the Krellians, populations watched humans take their council seat and began planning their own resistance. On planets threatened by other empires, leaders reconsidered whether submission was truly inevitable. Across the galaxy, the balance of power shifted as species realized they did not have to accept conquest. Lyra remained on Earth for several months, helping facilitate the transition and learning about human culture. She walked through cities being rebuilt, spoke with survivors about their experiences, and began to understand why this species had refused to surrender. They did not see themselves as special or chosen. They simply saw survival as something worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Every human carried the legacy of ancestors who had survived ice ages, plagues, wars, and extinctions. Giving up was not in their nature. When Lyra finally returned to Council headquarters, she brought with her a gift from the humans. It was a memorial stone inscribed with names of every person who had died in the invasion. The inscription at the bottom was in both human English and galactic standard. "They attacked Earth and we survived. The galaxy watched and we won. This stone remembers our dead and reminds the living that no species should ever fight alone again." The Council placed the memorial in their main chamber, where every representative would see it daily. It served as a constant reminder of what had happened when they chose observation over action, and it stood as a promise that such failure would not be repeated. Earth's fleet grew rapidly over the following years. Human ships patrolled regions where species faced threats from more powerful neighbors. They responded to distress calls the Council moved too slowly to address. They kept their promise to ensure no civilization faced annihilation alone. The galaxy had changed, not because of superior technology or overwhelming force, but because one species refused to accept that survival was impossible. The humans had proven that determination, adaptability, and sheer stubborn refusal to surrender could overcome any advantage. And the entire galaxy would never forget the lesson Earth had taught them. Toril sat in the observation chamber one final time, looking at Earth through the displays. The planet had healed remarkably well. Cities were rebuilt. Populations had stabilized. The scars remained, but they no longer defined the world. He thought about the first day of the invasion, when he had assumed Earth would fall like every other world the Krellians attacked. He remembered his certainty that observation was sufficient, that interference was unnecessary. He had been wrong, catastrophically, shamefully wrong, and humanity had paid the price for that error in lives that could never be recovered. But they had also given the galaxy something precious: hope, the knowledge that survival was possible even when logic suggested otherwise, the understanding that watching atrocity was not neutrality but complicity. Earth had changed everything, and Toril, like the rest of the Council, would spend the rest of his life ensuring that change led to something better.